lawyers can be business people, not just lawyers, and they can do business work, not just legal work. You don't want to be a generalist, just a generalist, and you don't want to be just an expert. You want to be a combination of the two, an expert generalist. And the way to do that is to become a T-shaped professional, is to expand your capabilities.
This week, we're doing something a little different. This book, A New Vision for Corporate Lawyers, was written by Peter Connor, CEO and founder of AlternativelyLegal. And Peter focuses on the changing landscape of law and what lawyers are going to have to do to make adjustments to their skills and competencies and mindsets in the way that they work with the changes. Guest interviewer Santhi Latha, who is the Dean of the Rajah Tann Academy, takes us through the interview with Peter, pulling out some of the key ideas in his new book. Enjoy.
So the first question is, why did you write this book, and what on earth possessed you to do this?
Yeah, great question. I guess for many reasons, but for two main reasons. One is because I can, and the other is because I feel I need to. So let me just explain. I mean, the reason I can is because I've been very fortunate, I suppose, in that I've had a very diverse legal career, working as a lawyer, both with a firm, Baker & McKenzie, but also in-house. And that's been international. I've been able to work overseas, in Europe, in Asia, in the States. And that's given me, and frankly, to work with companies that have given me the scope to work in pretty much whatever way I like. So I've sort of stumbled upon, I guess, a way of working that, was very successful for me and very fulfilling. But frankly, I did stumble upon that. And so, what that then has allowed me to do, and I've been lucky that I've had the time then to reflect on that since I stopped working as a lawyer, and to then kind of distill some of those experiences into, I guess you'd say, theories and principles, and then to put that into these programs that, as you know, Santhi, I've been delivering to legal teams, legal departments, and to law firms, literally thousands of lawyers all over the world. So testing out these ideas in person, at least until COVID, and then certainly afterwards by Zoom. So it's been a very unique opportunity then to do this, and frankly, to give something back. So that's why I can. The reason why I feel I need to is because I think, lawyers are very busy. They're very busy working as lawyers. And then they're also very busy to the extent that they are changing and making changes. They're heading in a certain direction, which is, not surprisingly, trying to be better lawyers, to be the best law firms they can. And they're very focused on, enhancing the quality of the legal work, to deliver legal services more cost effectively. And all of that's great, but that's sort of a means to an end. It's really not the end. And frankly, a lot of that doesn't actually result in significant benefits for the ultimate client, which is the business of these corporations that lawyers either work for directly or indirectly. And so what I see is the need to head in a different direction. And that's the one that I outline in the book, A New Vision for Corporate Lawyers, which is a direction which is more focused on the business and on realizing that lawyers can be business people, not just lawyers, and they can do business work, not just legal work. And so that's a different direction. I feel like I need to point that out. Some lawyers do that to some extent, but fewer people do that than you might expect. And secondly, those that do it don't call it out, and they don't spell it out. So therefore, people don't really kind of understand what this is all about and how they can do it and do it more effectively. So I guess they're the two main reasons I wrote the book.
Okay, so let me expand on that a little bit. Your statement that business people, legal people, that there is a bridge that the lawyer needs to cross, because the lawyer needs to not only be a legal expert, but also a business person. What's your perspective of that business role, that expectation of what the lawyer has to do to manifest that business expertise?
Okay, that's great. Great question. Now, obviously, the answer to that depends on every lawyer is in a slightly different situation. If you work in a law firm, then there are certain constraints and opportunities that flow from that. And if you work in-house, so that's one big distinction. Clearly, the scope for doing this, there's more scope for doing this if you work in-house as a broad general statement. But that doesn't mean you can't do it when you work in a law firm. And then secondly, within those two big buckets, there are some companies and some roles that say if you work in-house where you have a tremendous scope for doing this, taking it to an extreme, especially if you're a general counsel of a very progressive company that's not regulated. I mean, there's really the sky's the limit. Whereas if you're in a more specialist role, then the scope for this is a little more limited, but as I explain in the book, it's definitely still there and it's still very important. And likewise with a law firm, I think you can embrace this idea. And it all starts with what I call a mindset. There's a number of different mindsets, but one of the most important ones are what I call a business person mindset. And so what that means is that you think of yourself as not just a lawyer, but as a business person. And that means, for example, that you feel like if you're in-house, you feel like you're part of the business, and you think about the business, not just about the daily things you have to do as a lawyer. If you're in a law firm, it means you think about the business of your clients and get to understand it, to really understand it. And frankly, a lot of lawyers working in law firms, they say they're very client-centric, but they actually don't really make an effort to really understand the challenges of the in-house legal department and even more so, the challenges of the business. Now, of course, you can't do that for every client. Every lawyer can't do that for every client if they're working in a law firm. But there are ways to do that, as we've discussed, where you could, for example, sort of divide that up amongst a practice team, so that different lawyers could dive a little deeper into different clients. So, but it starts with that mindset. That's the start of it. And then it has to translate into action, into work. And that's why I talk about, so there's two kind of buckets there. One is what I call business advice, not just legal advice. So that's literally in the context of you working with someone, with a client, not just thinking about the legal issues, but spotting any potential business issues. So that's a very simple thing that anyone can do. And there are other examples of that where you can just slide that into whatever you're doing, automatically. That's at one, easy end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is where you literally create time to do work that has nothing to do with the law, but it's helping out, your client. So, for example, if you're a law firm, that might be kind of really, understanding that a client needs help with technology. They don't understand it. They need some help with something, or you've got project management expertise that they don't have, and you can sort of, get them involved. So the lawyer themselves may not be the project manager, but they understand that that's required. And then they get someone else involved to help the client with that. If you're working in-house, then it's when you're in a meeting, it's sort of identifying that there's an opportunity here to help the business or to solve a business problem. And then you use the skills that you have as a lawyer then to help you solve those problems and exploit those opportunities. So there are examples of action, of things you can do in your work to realize this idea.
Thank you, Peter. So before we become even more serious and earnest in what we're going to talk about, I know that this book is free. So that's magnificent, because what it means is that more people can have access to it. And I want to know, why is it free? What were you thinking when you said, oh my God, I'm going to do all this work. I have these years and years of experience, and I'm just going to put it all together in this book, and then I'm going to share this with the world. What was the thinking? What do you want to achieve by doing that?
That's a great question. So originally, to be perfectly honest, I was looking at, traditional publishing. And you may know that I did actually speak to a few authors who've written legal books. And one of them told me that he was a US author. He said, Peter, look, I could give you the names of various publishers, but I can tell you, and he's quite a successful author. He said, really, the most you can expect, about 3% of authors, business authors generally, publish more than 500 copies of their book, sell more than 500 copies. And I thought to myself, well, look, I'm not really in this for the money, and I'm certainly not going to make much money out of doing that. I really want this message to get out to as many lawyers and, frankly, other people involved in the legal industry, corporate legal industry, as possible. And so that's why I decided to go with Legal Business World and to make it about, because they have a pretty good global reach, and to get this message out to as many people as possible. And as you know, I've got other books I plan to do. We can talk about that later. But I just wanted that first book to get out there and for as many people as possible to read it, and then trying to kind of get the message of why it might be important for them to change and what that change might look like.
Okay, so let me pick up on that. In your book, you refer a lot to the changing landscape, right? And even right now, as we speak, generative AI has come on board, and this is a new toy that everybody is playing with. I know from my experiences in the legal community here that there are two schools of thought. The one school of thought is shut it down because, we are not ready for it. There's no regulatory framework for it. Yeah. And there are a lot of risks involved. And then the other stream of thought is, oh, new toy, let's go play, let's discover, let's learn, let's be more productive, let's make life easier. But that's just one aspect of the changing landscape. When you talk about the changing landscape, what are you referring to exactly?
Okay. Well, there's a lot to that. I dedicate a whole chapter, the first chapter in the book, to that, to describe that. And the way I do that is I look at that firstly from the point of view of there's some macro changes that are happening that are sort of unrelated to not specific to the law as such. And that's things like you mentioned, like the rise of increasingly capable machines, as Richard Susskind likes to refer to it, just increasingly, being able to assume work that not just lawyers but others, do. So there's those sorts of trends. The future of work. I mean, there's a big thing of talking about the future of work as a result of things like the advance of technology, and yet I feel like lawyers don't really spend much time talking about that and what that might look like. So there's lots of things there that are general. There are lots of things happening in the business world. And then there's a whole bunch of things happening in the corporate legal industry. So, the good news is that there has been, since I set up Alternatively Legal about 8 or 9 years ago, there's been quite a lot of change happening. And some might say, look, we've got all this change, we're investing in technology, we're setting up new business, alternative legal service provider business models, where legal procurement's done in a different way now. So you can point to a lot of change. The problem is that most of that change is to something, in other words, to a process or a system, and primarily those processes and systems are internal processes and systems. So, for example, they are legal department process and systems or process and systems within the law firm. They're not really changes that the primary beneficiary of which is the legal department or the firm, not the client. And so whilst that's terrific, and people talk a lot about that being innovation, personally, I don't see it that way. I mean, to me, innovation is a change that adds value, to the client, not necessarily just to the law firm or to the legal department. So it's not to say those changes are not worthwhile, but to give them the status of innovation, I think is a little bit disingenuous and not particularly helpful. So lots of changes happening there, all of which make sense, again, to the extent that that frees up time and saves money and makes people more efficient. So, and not to say they're not good things to do, but they're means to an end. That can't be the end. It has to be something more than that. And the answer is there is. And that's fundamentally to free up time for lawyers, for people to change and to do. But there's been very little change in terms of, what lawyers do, change in what they do, and their capabilities to do new work. And that's what I call human transformation. So there might have been arguably a lot of digital transformation, but there's been very little human transformation. And that's, I think, an area where that's an area where I focus, and that's an area which I think is incredibly important.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the time for change has come, or maybe has even passed, and we still have people in the legal industry lagging behind because the changes that they make are superficial, process-driven, and the concept of just, turning to technology to resolve some issues is not fundamental change, right? This is what you're saying. So when you talk about the need for change and what to change to your book, you refer to T-shape. And that T-shape is a fundamental part of what the book is about. The direction that you envisage that legal leaders will need to take. Can I ask you to sum up, before we go into greater detail, what this T-shaped person or professional looks like to you?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I like the T-shaped professional concept because it's a symbol, if you will. It captures the idea, what I'm talking about. And let me explain why. So let me firstly explain what's the T-shaped professional, because not everyone's heard of that. So the T-shaped professional has been around for quite a while. It's widely used and talked about for all sorts of functions, whether that's accountancy, human resource specialists, IT specialists, you name it. Pretty much every function in the business has thought about and is using this idea of the T-shaped professional. The reason is because most professionals are I-shaped. In other words, they have a very deep but very narrow level of expertise and capability and experience. And that's worked okay, sort of, up until now, because people have tended to work in silos to some extent. But increasingly, it becomes necessary to work in teams, to work and to collaborate with others. And frankly, that's more difficult if you have such a narrow area of expertise and experience and things. And so therefore, this idea of the T-shaped professional is the idea that, yes, you want to still have your area of expertise, but you want to develop a level of, skills and other things, other capabilities is the generic word I use, and experience, that is, work in areas beyond your core area of expertise. So in this case, beyond the law, not to the same extent as your expertise and experience in the law, but, to some extent. And so that's the idea. So as I mentioned in the book, the one idea is this idea of the legal expert, the expert generalist. And that's another idea that's out there in the business world. So I think that captures what I'm talking about very well. And that is this idea that you don't want to be a generalist, just a generalist, and you don't want to be just an expert. You want to be a combination of the two, an expert generalist. And the T-shaped lawyer the T-shaped professional is a great way to symbolize that, because you can see it in the sense that, the vertical aspect is your depth aspect, and the horizontal, dimension is one that is not so deep, but is broader. And so to me, that captures that idea very well. And the fact that it happens to be something that's widely used in the business world, and because the business side of things is the essence of the T-shaped professional, to me, that's why I chose that idea. And hopefully that will resonate with people, and it will resonate with clients and others that, lawyers are working with.
Thank you, Peter. May I at this point say that it resonates actually very deeply with me, because I get it. I get it that whether it's from our education or from our work experience, we've all become sort of specialists and very honed in on the areas that we work on daily. And so when I first read your book, the question that I had to ask myself was, is being so specialist enough? Because at the end of the day, we all serve, right? Whether we're serving clients or we're serving the organizations we work with. And when I read your book, I realized that in order to be able to serve better or serve more efficiently, there are so many other components, mindsets, capabilities, skills that would actually add tremendous value. So yeah, I do get it. And I hope that the audience here gets it as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the key word there at the end, value, adding more value. That's actually what this is all about. If I could distill it, there's all these different reasons why, individual lawyers and law firms and legal teams might want to change. But if there's one overarching objective to change in the way that I suggest, it's exactly that. So that whether that's you, Santhi, in your role, or whether that's a lawyer or someone working in business development or whatever, can add more value. And the way you can add more, because that's really what everyone wants. Why do they want that? Because that means that you then, entrench and develop your relationships with your clients. They're willing to engage you more. And frankly, just at a simply human level, you're going to be valued more. You're going to be appreciated more. And that's actually one of the problems. One of what I call, there's a number of problems. At a superficial level, the legal industry looks fine, right? Law firms are making lots of money. In-house legal teams are doing very well. But you scratch the surface a little bit, and there are some problems. And one of those problems is that, lawyers, frankly, don't feel appreciated for the work that they do as much as they might. And they don't feel valued as much. Yes, they're almost a necessary evil, as it were. And frankly, I think a lot of businesses view lawyers as more of a burden on the business than an asset to the business, to put it in broad, sweeping terms. That's how the business looks, rightly or wrongly. That's how, if you speak to business people, that's what they will tell you in general. So I think there's an opportunity for lawyers to change that and to become much more of an asset to the business and to be more valuable to the business. And the way to do that is to become a T-shaped professional, is to expand your capabilities and your experience, and to do not just legal work and give legal advice, which is a very narrow value proposition, but to expand that and to help the business out more broadly. Or in simple terms, not to work on the business, but to be in the business and to help the business.
So I'm taking notes, copious notes, as I always must. So let me ask you a cheeky question then. Are you a T-shaped professional? Do you consider yourself with all your experience, I think it's 25 years of experience working as a lawyer, and then, building this whole concept. Is this reflected in you, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's very much so, I think, because like I said, I sort of stumbled upon this. I was given sort of free rein to work the way that I wanted to, and I naturally gravitated this way. There was no book encouraging me to do this. But I quickly realized that, for example, one company I worked for quite a while, Sun Microsystems, famously, the CEO, Scott McNealy, he didn't actually like lawyers very much. I mean, and that was, we all knew that. He loved engineers, he loved salespeople, but he didn't really like lawyers that much. And that's okay. And so you realize soon that being a lawyer, which is important, lawyers, you study hard, you work hard to become a lawyer. It's a big part of your identity, your personal identity, being a lawyer. The problem is that can get in the way. There's a book called The Adaptability Advantage, where they talk about the importance of being adaptable. And one of the biggest obstacles to being more adaptable is identity. Your professional, it blocks you from, changing. And this is what I feel is very much true, of lawyers. And so I just learned, I hadn't read that book, but I kind of quickly figured out that the way to be more successful was to just be one of the team, and to kind of, throw my kind of lawyer badge away. And I mean, I still have my lawyer brain switched on. It's not to say you're not thinking about legal issues, but to become part of the team. And I just naturally went that route. And I guess when the culmination of my sort of career, I suppose, one of the highlights, I should say, was winning the leadership award, the business leadership award from that, from Scott McNealy, the CEO award. And I remember him saying to me, I was one of, I think, 6 people in a company of 24,000, the only lawyer to win the award. And, he kind of said to me, "You're a bit different. You're not like other lawyers." And he said, "One thing I really like about what you do, Peter, is that, you're looking out you identify problems and opportunities. And rather than saying that's someone else's problem to fix, even though it wasn't legal, you go and fix it, or you get a team together to go and work it." And that's that whole concept of business leadership. And so, yeah, I think so. I think that I stumbled onto that, and I realized that's an important thing. And since I've stopped being a lawyer, as you know, I worked in a business role as head of technology for a compliance firm. So I literally work with software engineers and data scientists to develop software products for compliance, products, sort of clients. And I've run, an e-learning business. I've got e-learning products and stuff. And of course, now been working in consulting and training, of course, for quite a while. So yeah, I think I've enjoyed that. I find that really rewarding. You grow and you learn, and frankly, it's all about growing and learning and just constantly learning. I think that's what the exciting thing about being a T-shaped lawyer really is.
Thank you for that. I know it wasn't a direct answer, yes or no, but I do get a sense that everything kind of ties up together. So your experiences, these conversations you've had, the training that you've done, the opportunities you've opened for other organizations are all built on the essence of what a T-shape is. So which I think is pretty fundamental. Okay, so let's go in a slightly different direction, because I realized that there's a lot of terminology that you use in your book. And that when we talk about this terminology, a layperson, or I would at the start look at this from an ordinary English context, right? So the jargon doesn't necessarily have definitions that are normal, because you have used specific phraseology for specific reasons, which of course are manifested in the book. So you talk about things like your expert generalist. You talk about things like the business person mindset. You talk about, the T-shaped professional, the T-shaped lawyer. So there are all these wonderful amalgamation of words that have very unique and purposeful meanings. I wonder if we could take a few minutes for you to elaborate on some of the terms that I'm going to throw at you, so that we can see what it means in the context of the vision that you have. So let's start with the first one. So when you talk about...
Before you do that, let me just
Okay.
make a general comment, Santhi. So I'm glad you picked up on that. And actually, I think it's a really important point. I think it's kind of ironic that lawyers are very precise when it comes to the law itself, right? To legislation, to drafting a contract, to giving an advice, very precise when it comes to the law. But actually, when it comes to the practice of law or changing the practice of law, lawyers actually, lose that precision. And so there's a lot of imprecision when it comes to words like innovation, vision, transformation, business, being a business partner, all these kind of ideas, some of which we might talk about in a minute. So I'm actually in the process of writing an article right now for the Association of Corporate Counsel, which is about the importance of being precise when it comes to change in the legal. Because otherwise, if you're not precise about these terms, then you may think you're transforming or innovating or what have you, or being, and you're not. And so you're actually not changing in the way that you think that you might be. So it's absolutely really critical to, come up with some terminology here that we can all agree on as a corporate legal industry and use that terminology. It's not semantics. It's actually really important, just as it is with the law, to be precise. It's equally important to be precise about changing the law and the practice of law.
I agree. I think that when we look at the use of these different terminologies in your book, you have a very specific vision or target for each of these. So I don't think these are, jargon that you've put together willy-nilly, but it's actually been thought out with great detail. So I want to tap a little bit on that and understand directly from you what you actually mean or envision with some of these different words. I'm not going to, load you down with all the different things, but yeah. So this business person mindset, let's start there. So if a lawyer is reading this book and they're like, but I'm not a business person, and so this is not going to matter to me. I know earlier you've already said how important it is to have a sense of the clients that you have or the organization that you work in, and how important being aware of the business and contributing to the business matters. When we talk about the business person mindset, is this what you're referring to?
Yeah, great question. So, okay, so since I've released the book, a few people have come back and said, yeah, I've got a business person mindset. I'm business minded. Or they might say, I understand the business. And then I have to point out, and it's a little bit awkward to do this, in LinkedIn and stuff. But anyway, the business person mindset is not being business minded. So you could be business minded in the sense that, you could have business acumen even, but that's not the same thing as having a business person mindset. And the reason, for example, let's just touch on that one, is because you need to have business acumen and be business minded to have a business person mindset, but it's necessary but not sufficient. Because having a business person mindset is literally thinking of yourself as being, let's say, in a law firm, even if you're not a partner, to feel like you're a partner and to think about, yourself in that way, and therefore to be thinking about the business of the law firm and how you can help the law firm business be more successful, not just focused on doing, drafting your contract and giving legal advice. And equally, let's just stay with the law firm context. As I mentioned earlier, thinking about the business challenges that your clients, let's take the legal department. So you're working in a law firm, to really understand the challenges that that legal department face. It's not just give them legal advice when they ask for it, but think about their challenges. And they have lots of challenges. In fact, there's the irony. If you're a general counsel of a law firm, of a legal department, you spend 90% of your time thinking about business challenges of running the legal department and providing business advice to the business itself. You spend very little time actually giving legal advice. So it's thinking about those things and thinking about the business challenges of the business, the ultimate client, which is really, that's having a business person mindset. And I spell out in the book a little more specifically, kind of what that means and how you can tell. So you can actually you can tell, you can assess yourself as to whether you have a business person mindset or not. So that's one thing. And equally, understanding the business is necessary but not sufficient. So you can understand the business, but not necessarily have a business person mindset, because you're not thinking of yourself as a business person. You're thinking of yourself as just a lawyer. And that's the contrast. So with all these mindsets, there's a contrast between one thing or the other. So most lawyers think of themselves, frankly, as just a lawyer. And I explain in the book kind of what that means. And it's a concept I came up with to try and help kind of, as you say, be more specific about what I mean about that idea.
Thank you. So if I can summarize it, if you think like an owner of a business, which means that you're willing to look at the challenges and opportunities, not just in your specific area, but in all the different parts of the business, that brings you closer to achieving a business mindset?
Yeah, absolutely it does. So, again, just stay with the law firm context, because that's one that's familiar to you. Yeah, it's the idea that when you come to work each day, or even when you're on the train going to work, you're not just thinking about, well, I've got 5 tasks I need to do. I know how am I going to do those tasks? You're thinking about, the business of the firm. What are the challenges the business of the firm takes, and are there opportunities for me to help the business of the firm, even if I'm not a partner? You think in that way, and if you think of that, if you have that mindset, guess what? You're more likely to become a partner quicker than someone who doesn't have that mindset. So it's a very important mindset to have for your career success. And frankly, for engagement, it's much more, frankly, more interesting, I think, and rewarding if you are engaged in the business of, let's say, the law firm, and you're engaged, if you're in-house, engaged with the business that you support and that you're involved in, than if you just think of yourself as just a lawyer with a bunch of tasks that you have to get done each day. And it changes everything. As there's a saying that mindsets are like filters. They're like a filter for kind of how, or a set of glasses, actually, might be even a better analogy. So if you've got just a lawyer, mindset, then your vision, your glasses are like that. You just see this narrow focus. If you've got a business person mindset, it's like having a wider lens. And all of a sudden, you can see things that you didn't see before. You can see problems, you can see opportunities, and you can see ways to help. And that's why it's so important. In fact, there's not much point learning new skills if you don't have the right mindset, because you won't be able to see the opportunities to use those skills in new ways. And that's something I mentioned in the first book, and it's really the subject of the second book that I'm just working on right now.
Oh, Peter, it looks like you're trying to change the world. I'm
ambitious. I'm probably very naive, but ambitious.
No, it's good. It's good. I think that it's so important to actually provide people with the opportunity to reflect and realize, right? Because sometimes you're so blinkered with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis that you don't get to see the bigger picture. So I'm going to now take this whole idea about, I'm a legal professional, I might be working in-house, or I might be working in a law firm, and I've read Peter Connor's book, the first book about this. Does it work if I'm a junior lawyer to start thinking like this? Because, as a junior lawyer, whether I'm working in-house or in a law firm, I have very little power, very little influence, very little say. At what point does your book matter in the trajectory of one's career? Who would your target audience be? The first yearer, someone who's on the fringes of partnership, or, going to management? Who's the target audience?
That's a great question. The answer is that it really applies, as I mentioned earlier, to everyone, to every lawyer. Even though the scope for doing what I am suggesting might be more limited at a junior level, that is not a reason, for a junior lawyer not to be thinking about this and doing it from the outset. And one of the advantages of, I get asked this question quite a bit, of a young lawyer, a junior lawyer, sort of thinking about this, and is that they can actually work in this way right from the outset. It doesn't involve a change, which it does, which it will for most more senior lawyers. It can become the way they think and the way they work right from the outset. And yes, they may have very limited scope to do that. They may not interact, if you're working in a law firm, with clients at all to start with. But there's nothing to stop, a junior lawyer thinking about the business of the law firm and how they can help. And again, as I said earlier, someone who displays that interest and is thinking about stuff and makes the odd comment here and there is going to get noticed more than someone who's got their head down and tail up and just doing legal work. So it's the way to progress and become more senior more quickly. And also, I think junior lawyers, frankly, can contribute a lot to law firms and legal departments and businesses, because especially obviously in the area of technology, they have, for them, it's a lot more natural to be using some of these more advanced technologies than it is for more mature age lawyers. I see you smiling. It just frankly is, and so they can add value to things that I think it's a little more difficult for perhaps more senior lawyers to do. So I think it's something that everyone should be thinking about and starting to do right from the very outset.
Thank you. And that was just one example. So I just want to ask you one more example. In the book, you used the phrase business partnering a couple of times, right? And I know that you proceed to explain a little bit about this, but I know from working with you that there is a vast difference between business partnering and business development. And I think it's very, very useful for this audience to have an opportunity to reflect a little bit on the whole concept of business partnering. So if you could share.
Yeah, certainly. So actually, let me explain. There's really three kind of concepts for work that I'm talking about with this vision. There's business partnering, there's business development, and there's business leadership. So let's start with business partnering, because that's something that, frankly, every lawyer can do, whether they work in a law firm or they work in-house. And they can do it like tomorrow. They don't need to go and do any training for it. So that's at one end of the spectrum of what I call a spectrum. So business partnering is the idea of, really, in very simple terms, providing business input and business advice, not just legal advice. So I mentioned earlier on the call, you can be in a meeting, in a discussion, on a phone call, whatever, with a client, and you can be only provide input when a legal issue gets raised. That's one thing, and that's what a lot of lawyers do, just that. Or you can be thinking about it with a business person mindset and thinking about the conversation and engaged in the conversation. You may be just listening, and then you realize that there's a problem or an opportunity that's got nothing to do with the law, but you can see that there might be some problem with what's being discussed or proposed, and you can keep quiet or you can provide some input. And the input can come in many different ways. It doesn't have to be like, I think you should do this. It could be a question. Hang on a minute. If you did this, wouldn't this be, the outcome? And is that something you might be concerned about? So there's very different ways you can do it. That's business partnering. That's the simple concept of giving advice or input into a business. And that's business input. I'm not talking about legal input. It might be done in conjunction with giving legal advice, or it might not. So that's something that a law firm lawyer can do. They can do that in the context of the advice that they're giving, to the client, or together with the in-house legal team. And it's certainly something that an in-house lawyer can do, almost on a daily basis, all the time. Every interaction that they have with clients is an opportunity to, to engage in business partnering. And by the way, just very quickly, that's different to the idea of, most people, to talk about this idea of business partnering, they confuse the noun with the verb. So I think everyone kind of, agrees that, in-house, that they want to be a business partner. That's the noun. That's having a seat at the table. That's, being recognized as an equal, if you will. But you can be a business partner and not engage in business partnering, the verb, at all. And I've seen that time and time again. So people often get that confused. So you need to be a business partner in order to engage in business partnering. But again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So that's business partnering. And that's something, but lawyers in firms and lawyers in-house can do. And they can do it as much or as little as they want. And they don't need any particular training. Obviously, there are some things you can do to enhance your ability to do that, but that's business partnering. So let's jump to business development. So business development and business leadership are what I call, taking it one step further, going on the spectrum to where you're working. This is what I would call business work. So business development is obviously more relevant to lawyers working in law firms, and frankly, not that relevant to lawyers working in-house. I think pretty much every lawyer working in a law firm knows what business development is. It's the idea of, developing business, for the firm. And, that's its existing business and developing more business with existing clients and developing new clients and developing the relationships. And Kevin, of course, with, Sage, that's their particular area of expertise. So, I think that's something that every law firm lawyer needs to do better. And Kevin and Sage really help firms to be better at doing that. That's something that's work. It's not legal work. And yet it's something that obviously is incredibly valued by the firm. If you're good at doing that, then you're going to progress your career a lot more quickly. It's going to be a lot more, fun for you to do that. And you can do that in conjunction with, business development experts that the firm may have. So that's that sort of work. That again, doesn't get talked about much unless people like Sage come in and kind of help focus on that. But there are a lot of firms where there's not much conversation. Let's assume that rainmakers will go and do that sort of stuff, and you're either a rainmaker or you're not. So that's business development. Now, business leadership, on the other hand, is also business work, but that's primarily relevant to in-house legal lawyers working in-house, not so much to those working in law firms. And that's, as I mentioned in the book, I give some examples of that. So, for example, you could be, let's say, a patent lawyer, and you could be just working on registering the patents that you're asked to register, or you could be looking at that and thinking, well, hang on a minute. And this is a real situation that happened at one of the companies I worked at, where the patent lawyers said, well, we've got really no process here to evaluate which inventions should we be applying for patents for and which should we not? We didn't have a process for that. And so the ones that yelled the loudest got their patents registered, which is not a particularly good way of doing it. So the patent lawyers sort of figured out, well, we should have a process for evaluating these inventions, which is more objective and, allocates resources more appropriately based on the merits of the invention, not those who yell the loudest. So that's a great example of a simple example of a very specialist lawyer in-house can actually, and that involves work, to see that opportunity, then to set up a process, get other people involved, in doing that. And it's leadership. The reason I call it business leadership is because it involves leadership skills, the ability to influence others who you don't, they don't work for you, in order to influence them to do something that's ultimately for the benefit of the business. And that's work, legal, that's business work, it's not legal work. It might be adjacent to the legal work. In fact, I use that concept of adjacency in the book, but it's business work. It's not legal work, but it's of significant value, and it justifies, therefore, the time for you to do that. So there are examples and explanations. Hopefully that's a clearer idea of those three ideas.
It is. It's actually very, very useful. Just to ask you then, using the specific example that you've just mentioned, would that amount to innovation in your book?
Good question. Well, is it a change? Yes, it's a change. And does it add value? Yes, I'd say absolutely it does. That's a great, good question and a good spot. Yes, that's an example because it's change that adds value, and it adds value not just to the legal department, but to the business. And by the way, the really interesting thing about in my experience at Business Leadership is more often than not, this work that you put in to add value does provide value to the business, but it also actually provides value to the legal department because, we're not getting inundated with all these requests to kind of, patent this invention or that invention. There's a process that's followed, and so it actually ends up with usually benefiting the legal department as well. And that's the irony. It's a win-win kind of situation. So it tends to be very, very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, so when I was listening, I was thinking that basically what it means is we all have to go in with our eyes open. We have to be able to call out things that we think can be improved and potentially create opportunities or structures for improvement. It's a self-investment, isn't it? It's a self-investment in the organization that you work in, whether it's a law firm or a business. You have to commit yourself to it, and that would enhance your ability to have a more business mindset.
That's exactly it, Santhi. Yeah, it's being more engaged.
Yeah.
I like the word, just engage more, which, frankly, makes work more fun anyway than if you're not engaged and you're just only engaged to the extent that you have to do your particular transactional matter. I mean, that's just not very fun and not very fulfilling, and doesn't give you that opportunity to add more value in the way that we talked about and to innovate.
I agree. So I've read the book more than once, and I want to change. So I'm a reader. I love the ideas. At this time in my life, I am a legal expert, whether I'm working in-house or in a law firm. I know my business of the legal work that I do. So I want to take the next steps and I want to make these changes. Do I make it incrementally? What are the steps that I have to take, or do I have to wait for your second book to get the answers?
No, it's a great question. You don't. That's a great question. And there are a lot of misconceptions about when it comes to change. There's a lot of imprecision and there's a lot of misconceptions. And one of the misconceptions is that point that you just raised. So you hear a lot about this 1%. It's just 1%, right? And 1% is fine when it comes to the way that you implement a change. So Google has a famous innovation principle, which is that you want to think big and act small. And that's the answer to your question. In other words, and the mistake a lot of people make is they think small, they think 1%, and they confuse the vision with the implementation of the vision. So to have a 1% vision, a vision that sort of changes things by 1%, is frankly not a very inspiring, vision. So your vision has to be big, and that's what being a T-shaped lawyer and the vision is big. It's an aspiration. But of course, to answer your question, yeah, the way you would move forward on this is small steps, sort of how you can do it. And you can do that with business partnering. You can do that tomorrow. Go out there and just start and adopting this business person mindset. So yes, there are ways that you can, you wouldn't suddenly switch from being an I-shaped lawyer to a T-shaped lawyer overnight, no matter how good you are. But so that's the idea of, yes, absolutely. And that's at an individual level. And also at a team level. So when I do workshops with legal teams and with, firms and things, it's really taking you through a process where you can have, once you've got this vision, if you agree with this vision, then you can develop, so as an individual, you can develop a professional development plan as we've done with you and the Academy, and figured out a way that you can assess. So where are you sort of weakest in terms of, this is the T-shaped lawyer framework that is the subject of the second book, and something that, of course, we work together on to roll out. So there it's a case of sort of figuring out, where are the areas that each lawyer might want to focus on developing in order to get the most impact and to be able to realize that vision of a T-shaped lawyer. And that informs your professional development. That's at an individual level. At a team level, it's the same thing. It goes to strategy. And so you figure out that if this is what you want to do, you can then develop a series of strategic initiatives as a legal department or as a firm to kind of realize that vision over time. But it's important that your strategy does connect to the vision. And frankly, that's, again, a mistake that a lot of people make. Their strategy don't connect with an inspiring vision. And so guess what? They're not actually making a lot of progress, or at least not progress that matters to clients. And that's the key, getting back to that basic concept of innovation.
Thank you. So I'm just going to, because you talked about the little bit of work that we've done together. It's not a little bit, but the work that we've done together. So maybe for the benefit of the audience, when the RTA Academy was set up and we realized that, we're going to look at providing non-legal training, we didn't want to do this willy-nilly. We didn't want it to be ad hoc. We wanted to create a structure and a system where we could create learning pathways and roadmap a lawyer's journey from day one, so that these skills and competencies that Peter refers to in his book can actually come to fruition as part of their journey. So that's how we connected with Peter, thanks to Sage, by the way. And from there, what we've done with Peter's guidance and advice has been to develop this into, a full-blown structure and system and process of training and development. So we have specific skills and competencies that lawyers will have to achieve. And what it does is it just makes you better. It makes you more than just a lawyer. And that business mindset that Peter's talking about, that's the end game. Becoming a trusted advisor in the Rajah Tann network, that's the end game for us. And it's a committed investment that we make. And it's really, really useful to have something like this, Peter, because if not, we'd be doing training based on what someone thinks is the latest trend or whatever it is. And that's quite useless because there's no direction, there's no purpose. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Santhi, because you've just, I couldn't put it any better as a, sort of sales pitch for the T-shaped lawyer framework, because that's exactly it. It is adding structure to it. And let's face it, you're very unique. I have to, applaud, the management at Rajah Tann and you and the Academy for sort of recognizing that it's not about just, because otherwise you'll just be, as you say, just picking random things, and that won't get you anywhere. You have to have a structured approach. That's where the framework comes into play. And that framework has to be aligned with your vision. So when you first contacted me, you said to me that, the managing partner had this vision of lawyers being multi-skilled legal and business professionals. That's why, and that's the T-shaped lawyer. That's a metaphor for the T-shaped lawyer. And so you've done the right thing, is you've got your vision right, and now you're aligning, what skills and competencies and other things the lawyers need, other than legal skills and knowledge, with that vision. And again, that's something that very few firms do and very few legal departments do. They're just trying to kind of just guess what non-legal skills and competencies might be needed without actually figuring. And that's why, by the way, that's why I wrote the book in 2 parts. So book 1 is all about, why should you need a change and what might that change look like? And you got to get that clear first before you then decide on what skills and competencies do you need and capabilities do you need. That's why I split the book up into 2.
Okay. Change direction a little bit. Because apart from the jargon that you use, one of the things that I picked up on, or we picked up on, was you actually talk about 17 trends in in-house legal departments. Now, I'm just going to run through this. So we'll take a deep breath, and I'm going to do this, and then when I run out of breath, we're going to stop.
Okay.
The rise of the in-house lawyer, the more for less challenge, expansion of the role and expectation of in-house lawyers, formally assuming non-legal rules, unbundling of work, standardization of work, productization of services, right sourcing of work, insourcing and outsourcing, the professionalization of procurement, that's a mouthful, the rise of tech, data focus, emergence of legal OPS, more work for non-legal professionals, diversity and inclusion, sharing and collaboration, innovation. If you think about this list, every aspect of in-house is changing, going to change. And from what I think, in a fundamental way. Is there anything that's staying the same, Peter?
Well, sorry, Santhi,
Is there anything that's going to stay the same?
Oh, right. I see. No, not really. I mean, what's that saying? There's a saying that I may not remember this correctly, but there's a saying along the lines of the least change that's happening in your life is now. In other words, it's just going to the change, and I mentioned this in the book, that it's not just that the pace of change is quicker than it ever was before. I think that the nature of change is a bit different. I talk about the fact that certainly for most of my career as a lawyer, the change was continuous, and in the sense that the past was sort of a reference point for the future. But I think with things like, particularly with things like ChatGPT and generative, AI, I don't know that the past is going to be much of a reference for the future. So that's discontinuous change. And we are, I think, in a time of discontinuous change. And the relevance of that is that, therefore, as lawyers, as individual lawyers, and as legal departments and as law firms, you really do now need to reimagine what you could do and what work you can do. It's not about just therefore it's not about just being a better lawyer and trying to do it more efficiently, and that's not going to cut it anymore. It's important now more than ever to reimagine your work and therefore to reinvent yourself. And that's why I think the T-shaped lawyer is such a powerful kind of idea, because it gives you a sense of what that could look like and some direction and guidance for how to get there.
So when I read the book the first time, I actually had to take pauses because I was being, at least to me, there was so many ideas and so many perspectives. And what I had to do was try to fit myself into that perspective, to immerse myself into that perspective so that I could understand the value, right? And I think that's very, very important. So for the people who are going to read this book or who are already reading Peter's book, please know that it's very, very useful from my experience, at least, to take some breaks, because you need those breaks to look at how everything that Peter is saying is reflected in your actual life, whether you're in-house counsel or whether you are in a law firm, how in your day-to-day, those ideas and concepts and views can actually impact on you, right? So to kind of wrap up that whole discussion, which is very, very useful, because when I reflected, I was like, so I need to change this, I need to adjust that, I need to be more open to, so that was the impact it had on me. But I just want to ask about 4 words that you use consistently throughout your book. Mindsets, which we've kind of already talked about in the context of the business person, qualities, knowledge, and competencies. Could you tell me the difference, and perhaps not so much the difference as how they're connected to each other?
Okay. Well, now we are getting into the realm of the second book. So, and we will come back to that question when the second book, which I'm almost finished, when I publish that, and we can pick that up then. But let me just say this at this stage is that, see, I think when you read about this stuff and you read about commentators and things talking about it, they talk about, I think pretty much everyone gets now that, legal skills and knowledge alone is not sufficient. There wouldn't be many people out there who don't understand that idea. But then when they talk about, so what else do we need? You'll see it on LinkedIn all the time. People ask, well, what soft skills? They talk about it as soft skills. Well, first of all, that's a terrible expression that isn't really relevant. It's not helpful. It's not accurate. And it's not just skills. I mean, like you say, and as I say in the framework, it's skills, competencies, qualities, knowledge, mindsets, all of those things. And the reason why it's important to kind of be clear about that, first of all, there is no accepted terminology around this. I've done quite a bit of thinking and research on this. So I've come up with some definitions of those things. And I mentioned that in the second book. But I think that, it's important to distinguish between it because they come into play in different ways. So just to give you one simple example, so obviously a quality like curiosity, which is clearly an important quality, let's say empathy, even a better example, empathy is an example of quality that, you could spend a lot of time trying to be more empathetic, and that would, help you in your personal life and would help you to some extent, but you're not going to get the same, to put it in very crude terms, payback as you would if you spend time learning the skill of design thinking, which, by the way, involves empathy. Empathy is very important. It's an important component of design thinking. But if you spend the same amount of time learning about design thinking, the payback, the return on that investment in time in learning about design and then using design thinking is going to be immeasurably greater, and you're going to have a more immediate impact. So that's an example of why it's important to distinguish between these different things. And that's why, as you know, Santhi, we've kind of looked at that differently when it comes to implementing that as part of professional development. We're focused mainly on skills and competencies to start with. And that's because there is a more immediate payback from those things. But there are other differences too that would take a long time to explain that I do in the book. So we'll park that till then.
Okay, so yeah, so that was just a teaser, folks. And then from there, it's in book 2. So here we go. All right, I think it's really time to wrap it up. And maybe if I can just ask you, and I'm curious, what are you reading now? Because
What am I
you've obviously done a lot of reading and a lot of research and a lot of all of this stuff. So you kind of collate all of this, right? What are you reading now, Peter?
Well, I read all sorts of things. I mean, to be honest, I'm doing less reading. To the extent that I'm doing reading, it's reading to help me go a little bit deeper into these components of the T-shaped lawyer framework for the book. So I mentioned earlier, the adaptation advantage, a book there that is one book that I think is incredibly, powerful and really relevant to what I'm talking about here. I mentioned the, identity issue there, but there's lots of stuff that, they talk about there about, adaptability being, such a powerful thing and so important. And that's one of the components of my framework, as you know. But I didn't realize quite how powerful it is and quite how important it is. And you read that book and you totally get it.
Yeah.
I would encourage, that there's a book I would encourage people to read. And I mentioned, I give lots of references in the second book, as I do in the first book, for people for further reading, because I can't go, clearly all I'm doing, is sort of giving you a basic understanding of these ideas and how they can be used. You need to read deeper into these things. So that's a book I'm reading, but I'm spending a lot of time writing rather than reading. But and ultimately, I suppose this is a good note to finish on. And this is, in a sense, part of the conclusion of the second book that I'm writing, is that what we're talking about here is really, ultimately, it's about, learning, lifelong learning. So really, if people can kind of embrace that idea, then that's going to go a long way towards A, enriching their lives, and B, helping them to be T-shaped lawyers and to be, frankly, leading more successful and fulfilling lives.
Confirm you're trying to change the world. Thank you, Peter. It's been so insightful and so useful. And I really thought, that it wouldn't take us this long, but look at how much you've had to share. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Terrific. As always, Santhi, just as it was, it's been great to work with you and the firm. We've really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you.